psychology kind of circles back to what we talked about in the early days of William Wundt with structuralism. And this is the idea that now we're thinking about our thoughts again. With behaviorism, we were really only thinking about our behaviors. With humanism, we're now thinking about our emotions. But with cognitive psychology, let's get back to our thought process. And some of the thought processes we think about in modern cognitive psychology include things like decision making, how you process thoughts and make a decision, how you problem solve, and even just how you interpret things. If you see a dog walking up to you on the street, do you assume the dog's going to be friendly and want to pet you? Or do you assume the dog is going to bite you? How do you interpret things? What are the assumptions you make about the world around you? We have research side in cognitive psychology, and we have a therapeutic side in cognitive psychology. So first we're going to jump over to the research side. One early cognitive psychologist looked at cognitive development in young children, and that was Jean Piaget. So Jean Piaget was a father who really much examined his daughter's development, looking at how they would consider and make decisions in different ways throughout their childhood. He found that the way they understood ideas changed, and he looked at these things called schemas or schemes or schemata in psychology. These are really categories, how we categorize different things. So, and based on how we categorize things, we solve problems and put things together differently. For instance, you may see the watermelon, the pineapple, the lemon, the raspberry, and the pear, and you may have a schema that clusters those 5 things together. You may cluster them as food, or maybe you cluster them as fruit. Then we have the potato, the cucumber, broccoli, pumpkin, carrot, and tomato. You may have a schema for those things too. You may cluster them as garden food. You may cluster them as vegetables. You may cluster them as plant-based food. There may be different clusters. Now, one thing that Piaget talked about is how sometimes these schemas that we develop for these categories, they may change over time. What if I were to tell you that perhaps the tomato should not be with the vegetables? Is tomato a vegetable or is tomato a fruit? Maybe it belongs better with the fruit. Why would a tomato be a fruit? What are the guidelines that would cause it to be a fruit and not a vegetable? Maybe you say a fruit's what grows in trees and a vegetable is what grows in the garden. Well, then why would a raspberry be a fruit? It grows on the vine near the ground. And maybe you say the tomato is a fruit because the seeds are on the inside. Well, if the seeds on the inside is what makes a fruit, what about the pumpkin? It has seeds on the inside. What about the cucumber? So there's no right or wrong answers here. Our schemas are personal to us, unless you're a nutritionist or you're doing the taxonomy of vegetables and botany. But for us, it's more to understand our psychological schemas are not right or wrong. It's like the idea is a taco a sandwich, is a hot dog a sandwich. There's so many different possibilities for our schemas. Another big researcher in cognitive development was Noam Chomsky. So Noam Chomsky was looking at the cognitive development of language and how humans develop language in their early childhood years. Noam posited that the idea that humans are unique in having this true language versus non-human animals such as dolphins, parrots, and great apes may have very sophisticated communication, but that communication was not quite considered true language. And so he did a lot of comparing and contrasting how animals versus humans would use symbols through vocalization or body gestures to communicate. Of course, this is pretty controversial, and we'll talk about this in a later unit on whether animals have true language or not. Now, on the more therapeutic side of things, we want to talk about the cognitive psychologist Albert Ellis. And so Albert Ellis was interested in developing a new type of therapy called rational emotive behavior therapy. And the goal of this was to replace one's irrational beliefs with rational beliefs. He believed a person would experience something like depression because they had these irrational beliefs that they were a failure or that no one would like them. And he would say, well, how do you know no one will like you? Have you asked everybody? Well, no, of course I haven't asked everybody. Well, then you don't know if everyone will not like you. You have to ask everybody. Or I'll always fail at this. Well, how do you know? Have you tried different techniques to not fail at this? Or I can't believe this person hurt me. Well, why can't you believe it? They did hurt you. And he would poke apart these irrational things to change our thinking pathways. And that's because rational emotive behavioral therapy hinged upon this idea that our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors were intertwined. Rather than looking at our thoughts in isolation or our behaviors in isolation or our emotions in isolation, he believed we had to connect all three. Let's say a behavior you want to eliminate is that you are heavily reliant on alcohol. And just trying to look at the behavior might not be enough. We need to look at, well, what are the emotions that drive you towards drinking? Well, I feel stressed out and sad. And what are the thoughts you experience? Well, I feel like I can't control anything and I'll never get what I want. So you had to work on adjusting those irrational thoughts, and that would improve one's emotions and improves one's behaviors in the desired way. So acknowledging that those three all have to work together is very important. Much like Albert Ellis, roughly around the same time, his contemporary Aaron Beck was working on a cognitive behavioral therapy known as CBT. And so this was very similar to rational emotive behavior therapy in that it was looking at adjusting our cognitive assumptions. And Beck wrote about the cognitive triad. And this is the idea that people, when they feel negative, they tend to feel negative in three domains, or negative thoughts about three areas. That is, they tend to feel negative about themselves, they tend to feel negative about their future, and they tend to feel negative about the world. So we could use early 2020 as a good scenario. There's lots of things that are going on in the media that are very negative and very upsetting. And you could say the world's in a dark place right now. It's never going to get better. I'm never going to enjoy my life. Those are cognitive distortions and those are false. We can say there's lots of negativity in the world, absolutely. But there's lots of positivity in the world too. There's love in the world. There's helpfulness in the world. There's good people in the world. And although there may be bad things that are yet to come in the future, there will definitely be good days again. And although you may feel like there's some things that are not working out for you, there's definitely some things that are. And so he would try and adjust the cognitive distortions in all three of those domains. And so when it came time for cognitive therapy, this cognitive behavioral therapy that overlapped adjusting your thoughts with adjusting your behaviors became very powerful. And so this is now the most common type of therapy in North America and has been since roughly the 1980s. However, there are some drawbacks to CBT. Often in CBT, when you're telling someone to adjust their thinking, sometimes what they're worried about is legit. It's valid. Somebody's scared they're going to get hurt, and the threat of them getting hurt is real. So in modern CBT, we've also started to accept mindfulness into the fold. And that's the idea. Sometimes it's not about changing your thoughts. Sometimes it's about accepting your thoughts. Sometimes you're in distress. Sometimes things are legitimately bad. And the best way to process that is through acceptance. So mindfulness is the idea that when things are going horribly bad, a lot of us react by burying the bad stuff as fast as we can. We don't want to think about it. It's way too upsetting and we shove it down. And so mindfulness is the idea, well, in order to move through it and get past it, we actually have to be aware of that bad stuff, whether it's trauma from our past or trauma in the news right now, we have to be aware of it. So we have to dig it back up. And then once you have it, it can fill our mind and it can be really distressing in our mind. So you have to think about it and say, okay, I realize it's there. I accept it. It was bad. I can accept that this happened. I have to move past it now. And so in the goal of mindfulness, you unbury it, you realize it and accept its truth, but then you're able to move past it and you're able to get somewhere where you can have presence of mind. So rather than your mind being cluttered with all these stressors about school and health and money and hygiene, you can just be present in the moment. It's the idea of somebody's trying to work on their schoolwork, but all they can think about is their home responsibilities, and so they can't focus. And then when they're home and they're trying to do stuff, they're stressing out about they should be doing stuff about work or school. Mindfulness is the goal is when you're home, your mind is at home. And when you're at school, your mind is at school. And so this is a challenge for many of us in modern day life for obvious reasons, but it is a good goal to work towards.